Long ago, before the sun and moon had names, before anything you know had a shape, there was only the great tree. Its name was Yggdrasil, and it did not grow the way trees grow in gardens or forests. It grew the way time grows, slow and patient, holding the whole of everything within its branches and roots. Its trunk rose higher than any mountain, disappearing into a sky that had not yet learned to be blue. Its roots sank deeper than any ocean, reaching into places where light had never traveled. If you could have stood beside it, you would have felt very small and very safe, the way a child feels standing at the edge of the sea. The old stories say that Yggdrasil held 9 worlds within its frame, cradled among its branches and tangled in its roots like 9 lanterns hung on a single vast and quiet tree. Tonight, we will walk slowly through those worlds, the way the old Norse skalds once did around their fires, speaking softly so as not to wake the sleeping giants beneath the frost. There is no need to remember every name. There is no need to follow every thread. Let the story simply move over you, the way clouds move over a mountain, and let your thoughts grow heavy, and let your breathing grow slow, as we begin, at the roots of the world tree, where everything first began. The 9 worlds of Yggdrasil were not scattered carelessly. They were held together with the same quiet order that holds the stars in the night sky. At the very top, cradled among the highest branches, lay Asgard, the shining home of the gods, its halls roofed in gold that never dimmed and never rusted. A little lower, connected to Asgard by a bridge of trembling colors, the Bifrost, lay Alfheim, home to the light elves, who moved like drifting lanterns through soft-lit meadows. In the middle of the tree, held level with the trunk itself, lay Midgard, the world of humans, encircled entirely by a vast, cold sea, where a serpent slept coiled around the whole of the earth. Beside Midgard lay Jotunheim, the rugged land of giants, all jagged stone and endless winter. Below the roots, deeper than any of these, lay other worlds still, quiet ones, dark ones, worlds of fire and worlds of mist, and one final world, colder than the rest, where those who had lived long, ordinary lives went to rest at last. 9 worlds, 1 tree, and threaded through them all, an old magic that no one, not even the gods, fully understood. It simply was. The way the tide simply is. The way sleep simply comes, when you finally allow it to. Before the 9 worlds had names, there was only a great and formless gap, called Ginnungagap, an emptiness stretched between a realm of fire to the south and a realm of ice to the north. Where the fire's warm breath met the ice's frozen edge, something new began to stir, and slowly, out of that meeting, the first living shape took form. He was called Ymir, a giant vast beyond imagining, born not of a mother and father but of the meeting of frost and flame itself, the way morning mist rises when cold air meets a warmer lake. As Ymir slept, more giants formed quietly from the sweat beneath his arms, and life began to spread, slow and strange, across the emptiness. In time, 3 brothers came into being, grandsons of the ice itself, and their names were Odin, Vili, and Ve. Looking upon Ymir's vast, sleeping form, the 3 brothers understood that from his body an entire world could be shaped. So gently, without cruelty, the way a sculptor releases a shape already hidden inside stone, they used Ymir's body to form the world. His flesh became the soil. His blood became the seas and rivers. His bones became the mountains, his teeth the scattered stones, and his skull, lifted high above, became the great dome of the sky, held aloft at its 4 corners by 4 quiet dwarfs, so patient they have held their places ever since, without complaint, without rest, without anyone above them ever noticing how heavy the sky truly is. With the world newly shaped from Ymir's great body, Odin and his brothers looked upon the bare and finished land and felt it was still missing something. The earth had mountains now, and rivers, and a sky held steady overhead, but nothing yet walked upon it, nothing yet dreamed beneath its stars. One quiet day, walking along a distant shore, the 3 brothers came upon 2 fallen trees resting side by side at the edge of the sea, one an ash, one an elm, worn smooth and soft by centuries of gentle tides. Something about the pair of trees moved the brothers deeply, and they knelt beside them the way you might kneel beside something sleeping that you did not wish to wake too suddenly. Odin breathed life and spirit into the ash tree, and it became a man named Ask. Vili gave the elm tree understanding and the quiet motion of thought, and Ve gave it the gift of senses, warmth, and a voice, and the elm became a woman named Embla. From these two, gently formed from driftwood and breath, all of humankind descended, generation after generation, each one carrying just a little of that first quiet gift, given by three brothers on an empty shore, at the edge of a world still learning how to hold life. And so Midgard, the world of humans, was settled at last, cradled safely in the middle branches of Yggdrasil, encircled by protective seas, watched over gently from the shining halls high above. Of the three brothers who shaped the world, it was Odin who came to be honored above all others as the All-Father, ruler of Asgard, keeper of wisdom, and yet, for all his power, Odin was never a god who was satisfied simply knowing what he already knew. Something in him always reached further, the way a candle's light always reaches just a little past where you expect it to stop. He hungered for understanding the way some hunger for food, or warmth, or rest after a very long day. He wished to understand fate itself, to see the threads that connected every choice to every consequence, every ending to every beginning. It was said that Odin would often leave the golden halls of Asgard entirely, wrapping himself in a plain traveler's cloak, pulling a wide-brimmed hat low over his face, and setting out alone across the 9 worlds, appearing to mortals and giants alike as nothing more than a quiet, one-eyed wanderer. He walked through freezing mountain passes and across sleeping villages, listening far more than he spoke, gathering fragments of wisdom the way a careful person gathers fallen leaves, one at a time, unhurried, knowing that eventually they would form something larger than any single leaf could ever be on its own. It was during these long, quiet wanderings that Odin first heard whispered stories of a well unlike any other, hidden beneath one of Yggdrasil's 3 great roots, a well that did not hold water so much as it held knowledge itself, deep, still, and endlessly patient. The well was called Mimir's Mimir's well, named for the quiet, ancient being who guarded it beneath the roots of the world tree. It was said that anyone who drank from its waters would gain wisdom beyond anything a mortal mind, or even a god's mind, could hold on its own. Odin, when he finally found the well, hidden in cool shadow beneath a curtain of roots thick as ship's ropes, felt something he rarely felt, hesitation. Mimir, the well's keeper, watched Odin approach with calm, unreadable eyes, and told him plainly that such wisdom was never given freely. A price would be asked, and the price, Mimir said quietly, would be one of Odin's own eyes. Most gods, most mortals, would have turned away at such a cost. But Odin stood at the water's edge for a long, long while, watching his own reflection ripple gently on its dark surface, and understood that some kinds of seeing must be given up so that a deeper kind of seeing can be gained. Without another word, Odin reached up and paid the price the well required. He did not cry out. He did not ask for the offer to be softened. He simply lowered his face to the water afterward, and drank, long and slow, the way you might drink something warm on a cold night, letting it settle all the way through you. From that day on, Odin walked the 9 worlds with only one eye, and yet somehow, he was said to see more clearly than any being who had come before him. It is worth pausing here, in the quiet after that moment, to understand what Odin actually gained. It was not knowledge in the way you might know the name of a river or the shape of a mountain. It was something closer to understanding itself, an awareness of how all things were connected, how a small choice made in one corner of the 9 worlds might ripple outward for 100 years, the way a single stone dropped into still water sends rings all the way to a distant shore. With this new sight, Odin understood the shape of fate more clearly than ever, though even he could not change it, only see it coming, the way you might watch weather gather on a distant horizon long before the rain finally reaches you. Some say this is why Odin so often appeared thoughtful, even sorrowful, sitting quietly on his high seat in Asgard, a seat called Hlidskjalf, from which he could look out across all 9 worlds at once. He watched over giants settling into their long winters, over elves drifting through soft meadows, over humans building small fires against the dark, and over the slow, patient turning of fate itself, always moving, never quite stopping, the way your own thoughts are moving now, slower, softer, more distant, drifting gently toward sleep. Wisdom gained from Mimir's well was only the beginning of Odin's search. There was another kind of knowledge he still lacked, one that could not be drunk from any well, no matter how deep. This was the knowledge of the runes, ancient symbols that held not just meaning, but a kind of quiet power woven directly into the fabric of the 9 worlds. Odin came to understand that to learn the runes fully, he would need to do something almost no one else would ever have dared. He would need to hang himself upon Yggdrasil itself, the very tree that held all 9 worlds together, and remain there, without food, without water, without help from anyone, for 9 full days and 9 full nights. Odin pierced himself with his own spear and hung suspended from one of the tree's great windswept branches, swaying gently over a dark and silent void beneath him, where no one could see and no one could reach him. The wind moved through the branches around him. The stars turned slowly overhead. Odin did not call out, and no one came to lift him down, for wisdom such as this could not be given, it could only be earned, alone, in silence, the way the deepest kinds of rest are earned only after the mind finally stops fighting against stillness. For 9 days, Odin hung suspended between the worlds, growing weaker in body even as something else within him, quiet and patient, continued to grow stronger. On the 9th night, as the wind moved gently through Yggdrasil's endless branches, Odin looked down into the darkness beneath him, and there, faint at first, then clearer, he began to see shapes rising up to meet him. They were the runes, 18 ancient symbols, each one holding a fragment of the world's deepest order within its simple lines. Odin reached down, though his arms had grown heavy and slow, and took hold of them, one by one, drawing them up out of the darkness and into his own understanding. In that moment, exhausted beyond anything a mortal could survive, Odin finally understood not just individual pieces of fate, but the underlying pattern connecting all of them together, the quiet architecture beneath every story, every choice, every ending. He was lowered gently from the tree afterward, and though his body was weary, something in him had settled, the way a long-held breath finally settles once it is slowly released. From that night onward, Odin carried the runes with him always, sharing fragments of their wisdom with those he judged worthy, a gift earned through 9 long nights of stillness, hanging quietly above a darkness that no longer frightened him at all. Odin's search for wisdom did not end with the runes, for knowledge, once you begin gathering it, has a way of continuing to arrive on its own, gently, day after day, the way morning light continues arriving whether or not you are awake to see it. To help him watch over the 9 worlds without needing to travel every road himself, Odin kept 2 ravens close by his side, named Huginn and Muninn, whose names meant thought and memory. Each morning, as the light first touched Asgard's golden halls, Odin would release his 2 ravens, and they would fly out across all 9 worlds, drifting silently over frozen mountains, quiet villages, and sleeping giants, watching everything, forgetting nothing. Each evening, as the light began to fade, Huginn and Muninn would return to Odin's shoulders, one settling gently on each side, and there, in the hush of the great hall, they would whisper quietly into his ears everything they had witnessed that day. It was said that Odin worried more for Muninn's safe return each evening than for Huginn's, for he said that thought could always be found again if lost for a while, but memory, once gone, was far harder to recover. And so each night, Odin listened patiently to his 2 ravens' soft whispered reports, gathering the day's quiet happenings the way you might gather the last soft thoughts of your own day, right before you finally let them go, and drift, unhurried, into sleep. Among the many strange and wonderful creatures connected to Odin, none was more remarkable than his horse, Sleipnir, who was said to have 8 legs instead of 4, allowing him to run faster than any other creature across any of the 9 worlds, and even, when needed, to travel between them entirely, galloping smoothly through open air the way an ordinary horse might gallop across a quiet field. Sleipnir's birth was strange and unexpected, tied up in a clever bargain involving a builder, a wall meant to protect Asgard, and Loki, the trickster god who was rarely far from any story involving mischief. Whatever the strange circumstances of his birth, Sleipnir grew to become Odin's most trusted companion, carrying him swiftly across mountains, oceans, and the quiet spaces between worlds whenever urgent matters called him away from his golden hall. It was said that when Odin rode forth upon Sleipnir, the sound of 8 hooves moving together created a rhythm unlike any other, steady and unbroken, the way a slow heartbeat might sound if you pressed your ear gently against someone's chest late at night, listening to them breathe evenly in their sleep. Sleipnir asked for no glory and sought no attention. He simply carried his rider faithfully, wherever the 9 worlds required him to go, patient and steady, the way certain quiet companions remain steady beside us through even our longest, most uncertain nights. High in Asgard stood a great hall unlike any other, its roof made of interlocking golden shields, its walls hung with row upon row of polished spears that caught and reflected firelight like 1,000 distant stars. This was Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where Odin welcomed warriors who had died bravely in battle, offering them a place of honor beside him until the day the 9 worlds might finally need their strength again. These warriors, called the Einherjar, spent their days in Valhalla training and testing their skill against one another beneath Asgard's wide sky, and each evening, however grievous their wounds had seemed by afternoon, they rose again, whole and unharmed, and gathered together at long wooden tables for a warm and endless feast. There was mead that never ran dry, and meat from a boar that returned each morning fully restored, no matter how much had been eaten the night before, and laughter that echoed gently up into the golden rafters overhead. Valhalla was not a place of fear or grim duty, but a place of rest earned honestly, a quiet reward waiting at the end of a long and difficult road. And perhaps that is not so different from what waits for you tonight as well, not a hall of gold and shields, but simply a soft bed, a quiet room, and the gentle permission to finally, fully, rest. Not every creature connected to the gods was gentle or easily welcomed, and among the strangest was a great wolf named Fenrir, born to Loki and destined, the old prophecies whispered, to grow larger and more powerful than any of the gods felt entirely comfortable with. As a pup, Fenrir seemed harmless enough, and for a time he was raised among the gods in Asgard itself, fed and cared for the way you might care for any young creature still learning the shape of the world. But he grew quickly, far more quickly than expected, and the gods, watching him grow larger with each passing season, grew quietly uneasy. Rather than act with cruelty, they devised a clever test, a soft, enchanted ribbon, thin as silk, forged by dwarfs from 6 impossible things, the sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Fenrir, sensing something was not quite right, agreed to be bound only if one of the gods would place a hand gently in his mouth as a sign of good faith. Tyr, quiet and steady, agreed, and though the ribbon held Fenrir fast exactly as the gods had hoped, the great wolf now rests bound quietly at the edge of the 9 worlds, patient and still, waiting, as so many old and slumbering things do, for a day that has not yet arrived. As the long night wears on, and the stories of the 9 worlds settle quietly back into the branches and roots from which they came, it is worth remembering that Yggdrasil is not simply a tale from long ago. In the old telling, the tree still stands, its branches still stretch outward into every corner of the sky, its roots still reach downward into every quiet, hidden place. Odin still watches, somewhere, from his high seat, his ravens still fly out each morning and return each evening with the day's soft, gathered thoughts. Sleipnir still runs, steady and sure, between the worlds. And far beneath the roots, the Norns, 3 quiet sisters named Erd, Verdandi, and Skald, still tend the tree gently, drawing water from Mimir's well each day to pour carefully over its roots, keeping it alive, keeping the 9 worlds balanced, the way you might tend quietly to something precious late at night, when everyone else has already gone to sleep. They ask for no thanks. They simply continue, patient and unseen, exactly as they always have, and exactly as they always will. And so, as we come to the end of this long, slow journey through the 9 worlds, let Yggdrasil's ancient branches settle quietly overhead, and let its deep roots hold you gently, the way they have held every sleeping thing since the very beginning of the old stories. Odin's ravens have returned home for the night. Sleipnir rests in his stable, his 8 legs finally still. The Einherjar's long feast has quieted into comfortable silence, and the Norns continue their slow, patient work beneath the roots, unseen, unhurried, exactly as they should. There is nothing more you need to remember tonight. There is nowhere else you need to be. Let your breathing settle, slow and even, the way the great tree itself has settled through countless centuries of storms and stillness alike. Let the 9 worlds drift gently into the quiet dark, one by one, like lanterns being lowered softly for the night. Sleep now, beneath the great tree that has always held space for tired, wandering souls to finally, gently, rest.